There's so many great EQ plugins available today, but what are the very best EQ plugins of all time? Let's find out. Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about what I believe to be the best EQ plugins of all time. Now, there's a couple things I need to tell you. Number one is this is not a sponsored video. This is just, in my opinion, having worked 20 years in audio, what I believe to be the best EQ plugins of all time that we have. These are the ones I use day in and day out on my productions, and they make my workflow so much easier, and these are fun to use, and they sound amazing. Number two is that I'm a Pro Tools user, and so if there's EQs that are available but not in the Pro Tools format, obviously I won't be able to consider those. Number one, we have the Slate FGN EQ plugin. Now this is modeled after a Neve EQ, and I've actually used real Neve EQs. I've worked on real Neve consoles, and there's many Neve plugins out there, but to me, this one is my favorite. Super easy to use, and it sounds like what I remember Neve EQs sounding like. It's a very fun EQ. It's a color EQ. This is not a transparent EQ. This is an EQ that's going to impart color to whatever you put it on. And so simply passing audio through it is going to give you a sound, and you have this drive button down here in the bottom that you can click that in and drive the signal a little harder to get some saturation and distortion. But I'll tell you the two things I use this for the most. Number one, it sounds amazing on guitars. I definitely love to use it on guitars, but also any lead instrument that I want to get more attention, that I want to pop out of the mix more, that I want to sound more exciting. I'm using this number one for lead instruments that I want to pop out. Let me show you the two EQ frequencies that I prefer and that I use the most on this. Number one is it's set to it right here in this top band. It's set to 3.2 kilohertz. Now that's the one that I use to boost electric guitars, but also the frequency that I use to boost anything that I want to pop out of the mix. And with this EQ, a little goes a long way. So you can easily hear 1 dB of boost. 3 dB of boost is a big boost for this EQ. So I definitely love the way the 3.2K sounds. And sometimes I'll experiment and try other frequencies around that, but that's really the magic frequency that I love with Neve EQs in general, is around 3K. That's going to really give you the bite, and color in that frequency range just sounds, to me, so beautiful, and it's going to bring things more forward in the mix. It's going to force you to pay more attention to whatever you boost that frequency on. The secondary frequency I love on this EQ is down here on this first band, around the 200 frequency range. I would say anywhere between like 150 to 200, maybe even you can push a little above 200. But this is one of the things that people love Neve EQs for. It's got such a fuzzy warmth down in that frequency range between, I would say, 150 to 200. And so often I'm boosting there on guitars to give, if the guitars need a little more warmth, or even snare drum. This can sound great on around maybe 180 hertz boosting. 180 hertz on a snare drum can really give that snare more body. It just sounds great down there in that frequency range. I have so many other EQs, but this one has this nice fuzzy warmth in that low frequency area around 150 to 200. So those are the two things I use this for the most. Certainly the other frequencies sound good on this, but those are my go-tos, 3.2 kilohertz and around 200 hertz. The second EQ I want to talk about today is the Waves Puigtec EQ. Now this is a Puigtec emulation, and this is my favorite Puigtec emulation of the ones that I've tried. So obviously it can do the Puigtec thing. If you don't know what the Puigtec trick is, look it up. I have a video about that. But it can do the Puigtec trick, and it does that really well. And also in my video about the Puigtec trick, I add a bonus trick that not a lot of people talk about that you can use this for in the mix bus. But this is an amazing color EQ. Again, this is another color EQ. This imparts a sound. So if you just put this on a track, even without boosting or cutting, automatically it has a sound, and often I'm finding that it's a sound that's very pleasant even without boosting or cutting any frequencies. So I use this a lot for kick drum. You can do the Puigtec trick where you're boosting and cutting at the same frequency. So often I'll set it to 60 hertz and do the boost and attenuation, and it gives you that magic Puigtec trick boost on the bottom. Sometimes I use it on mix bus. It can add a real warmth in the mix bus. Again, check my video for how to do that on the mix bus. And then also these other frequencies can sound great. Sometimes I'll just use it at 8K or 5K and add a little boost. Again, this is a color EQ, and this is something that can sound great just putting it on a track without even boosting or cutting. The next EQ on this list today is the Fabfilter Pro-Q3. Now, unlike the other two EQs that we've talked about, this is not a color EQ. This is a very transparent EQ. So this is the EQ I use when I'm trying to cut frequencies, when I'm trying to find problems. And as you can see, as I put my mouse over here, it starts to show me the frequencies, a frequency curve of whatever's running through it. Right now, a whole mix is running through it. So this will give you an indication if you have some frequencies maybe that are jumping out too much in your mix. Like right here, it shows that 529 is jumping out. So if I want to turn down 529, I can just grab that and just dip. And so as I turn down now, you can see it just created that little dip for me, and I can obviously change the Q there. If you click on this right here, you can switch this to only left, so where you can take out frequencies in only left. I can switch it to only right. It also does mid-side, to where I can take frequencies out just in the middle band, or I can boost frequencies in the middle band. And then also you can switch to side. So this is really helpful because you could boost one frequency on, let's say, let me go back there. You could boost one frequency on the right, and you could boost a different frequency. Let's switch that to left. On the left. And so this can play around with this. This can give you some really cool stereo effects. And then I could even go down here and cut a frequency and make that stereo, or I can cut it just in the middle. So there's so much creative things that you can do with this EQ. It's such a fun EQ to use. Now in the Pro-Q3, they've added the ability to do dynamic compression, to where you can compress certain frequencies. So there's just so many things you can do with this. Now this is my favorite EQ for fixing problems, and also it's my go-to EQ that I use for subtractive EQing on the mix bus. The next plugin I want to talk to you about is the Eiosis Air EQ. Now this does some of the things that the Pro-Q3 does, but this is not a transparent EQ. This is a color EQ. And this is my go-to for air on the mix bus. So if you want to add a little sizzle on top, a little air in the mix bus, this air right here is so amazing. It sounds so good. And so often I'm just adding a little bit of air in my mixes here. 1 dB, this is an EQ where a little goes a long way. Even just 1 dB of air in the mix bus can sound great. Also, you can use the other bands to boost and cut. And if you look here, let me just boost down here and see I've got a boost here, a cut here, and then a boost on the air. And then one of the nice things is you can go over here to the strength knob, and I can turn this up and down. So if I just want less of an overall effect on this EQ, maybe deep into a mix, I just want to kind of tame what it's doing a little bit, I can just go over here and just pull down the strength. And what that does is it's taming all of these boosts and cuts. It's just kind of making them a little more neutral. Also, one of the nice things about this EQ is you have this fire and this water. So this, if you go to fire, it's going to change the sound. It's going to change the character. And then if you sweep down to water, it has a different sound, a different character, or you can just go in neutral. A lot of times I'm leaving it in neutral, but sometimes it's fun to just experiment and see what you're getting with switching this character over here. Next, we have the Amek EQ200. Now, this is an absolute beast on the mix bus. I love using this on the mix bus. It's got this mono maker here where you can turn that up, and you can mono. Let's say if I wanted to make sure every frequency below 60 hertz was mono, you can use this. I often use this. This actually is the plugin that I use for stereo width. I don't use a separate stereo width plugin. I like the way it sounds so much just right built into this EQ. that I use this for my stereo width. Often I'm just going up to about 110, maybe 115, and just subtly adding some stereo width on the mix. I don't think there's been a mix in the past year or so that I haven't used this on. It maybe subtly, but I use this on just about every single mix that I do on the mix bus. Also, the airband in this sounds great. And one of my favorite things about it is what it sounds like in the low frequency. Often I'm adding just a little bit of warmth down at around 50 hertz, 60 hertz. I'm adding just a little bit of warmth, maybe 1.5 dB across the whole mix. So another thing that I love about this EQ, let me just boost some air here. Let me see, boost air, boost a little warmth. One of the things I love is that you can use this gain scale and you can pull that back and watch the frequencies or watch the numbers here just go down as I'm pulling it back. So you can put this on the mix bus and then you can experiment. What happens if I just pull the effect of this plugin just down a little bit? Or it can go the other way. What happens if I boost just a little bit more? So I love using the gain scale. Also, you can click this button right here below the boost knob, and it gives you a different range. So instead of 15 dB boost, it goes to 7, which is helpful for mastering. And mastering, you're usually never boosting up to 15 dB. So this is helpful to just pop that in so you can kind of see some precise boosts and cuts. So again, this is a beast on the mix bus. I love this plugin. I love the way it sounds. It definitely is more of a color. I wouldn't say it's a super colorful EQ, but it definitely has a sound, and it sounds amazing on mix bus. I absolutely love this plugin. So lastly, I just have a few honorable mention plugins. These are plugins that are not necessarily my top favorites like the 5 I just mentioned, but these would be right after those. Some of the ones that are not necessarily my number one go-tos, but that I really enjoy using and I like the sound of. So first on that list is the Maag EQ, and this sounds great. This is the Maag EQ4. This is also a color EQ. The airband on this sounds great. All the bands sound great. It's got this sub down on the bottom. Sometimes that's fun to use. This is another EQ where a little goes a long way. You can just add a little bit of air. 2.5K here sounds really good. Just adding 1 dB there can sometimes do the trick. So this is a great EQ. I love to use this on drums, even vocals sometimes if I want to add a little more mid-presence. Awesome EQ, really colorful, really great. Next we have the Soundtoys Sie-Q. Now this is an awesome, affordable EQ that just has some analog magic in it. Again, I've used analog EQs, and there's just something about an analog EQ, if you get a good one, that just puts a smile on your face. Well, this is one of those EQs that for me just puts a smile on my face. It just has a character, it has a sound, and it's fun to play with. It also is fun to just use this drive knob over here. Sometimes just changing this drive knob can give you a different character, but this is a great EQ. I use it all the time and I really enjoy using it. Last one on my honorable mentions list is another plugin from Slate Digital. This is their custom series Equalizer. This is a fun EQ to play with. I'm using it a lot if I'm just trying to quickly dial in something. One of the fun things that you can do about this is you can copy this. Let me just copy one over here. And let's say if I want to boost at 2K here on the first one, and I want to cut at 2K. Well, the way that they've set this EQ up is the boost and cuts are not exactly the same, or else that would null out. If I boosted and cut at the same frequencies in the same way, it would just null out. But they've modeled so the cuts and the boosts are actually, they sound different. They have a little bit of different character. So sometimes just by boosting and cutting at the same frequency, kind of similar to what you do with the Puigtec, you can get some fun and interesting things. And so that's fun to play with. But this is just an overall, like a general EQ that sounds really good. Every band sounds good. I often use it and just use the high pass filters. Even the low pass filters are subtle. And so these can be really good if you're just wanting to tame, maybe you have a source that's just a little shrill on the top. You can just throw this on there and start to dial back this low pass filter until it gets rid of that shrillness. So this is a great EQ. Again, I use it a lot and highly recommend it. So these are EQs that, in my opinion, are the very best that have ever been made. Maybe there's an EQ that you love that didn't end up on this list. Let me know in the comments. I've used hundreds of different EQ plugins over 20 years in my audio experience, but I've not used them all. So if you have another EQ that you just think is amazing that I just didn't mention, let me know about it. Maybe it'll end up in a future video. If you got some value out of this video and you like this type of content, be sure to like this video and also subscribe to this channel. Turn on that bell for notifications so you don't miss my next videos coming out. Also, you can check out my other best of videos right here. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.